Codility brings you and your candidates the best hiring experience to separate the great from the good, and will help you adapt to the challenges of hiring remotely. This brings faster hiring, reduces bias, and gives your engineers more time to solve problems that matter. That's why we're already working with some of the best engineering teams in the world. Schedule a demo with us to learn how we can help you shape the future of work today. Codility. Remote tech hiring everywhere.
Hello, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks especially to our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedule to come and speak with us. My name is Brendan McCollum. I'm an engineering manager here at Codility, where we have a software platform that helps you identify and nurture engineering talent for your teams. But today we're going to be talking about something that's almost maybe arguably more important than the talent of a team, which is the culture of the team. And it's something that I think maybe we don't spend as much time thinking about. Maybe it gets lost or lumped in with soft skills, but is, I think, extremely important. And that's, how do you build a strong engineering culture in your team? And so to start things off, I'll just hand the mic over to the panel and let them introduce themselves. So I don't know who'd like to start. Maybe should we go counterclockwise?
Does that put me first?
I guess it depends if we're inside the computer or looking at the computer. Maybe Rose, go ahead. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, no problem. Hi everyone, I'm Rose. I'm a director of engineering at Bumble. So my job is to take care of a team of engineers, which covers a whole different discipline of developers and also testers, and basically support like the technical strategy, the people strategy, and all things related to engineering for my department. I'm relatively new here. I've been here just under a year. And I've actually had 6 months off on maternity leave, so that makes me even newer. But yeah, I'm just back to work. So yeah, I'm keen to talk to you all about engineering culture.
Thank you, Rose. I'm KK. My name is Keerthana Kumar, but I go by KK. I'm a director of engineering at Github, and I manage the enterprise tools teams. And I'm excited here because this is one of the most interesting topics. I manage both the engineering direction as well as the people direction in my org, and work across the company to also define a little bit of that. So talking about engineering culture is very fond to my heart.
Hi everyone, I'm also really excited to be here. I'm Jean-Marie Ferdégue. I'm the Director of Business Engineering for Gaming at Meta, formerly Facebook. So my role is similar to what you guys have been saying. So there's a lot of gaming businesses that use Facebook, Instagram, Oculus, WhatsApp, and our role is to ensure they are successful in doing that. So that means we work really closely with the product teams. Each of these product teams own their code base, and the work we do is super problem-centric. So whether we're there to identify, solve problems, whether that's through engineering, education, or any other mean.
Cool, thank you. So I guess just to kick things off, in your experience, what do you think makes a strong engineering culture, and why do you believe that's important to have this within a team? I don't know. KK, do you have any thoughts on that?
John, Jay, unmute it. Let him start, and then I'll take it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry, I unmuted myself because I love the question. I think it's quite a strong way to start the event. I think it's a super strong way because it's something that I've seen so many people ask themselves, like, what do I need to do to create a strong culture? And actually, why do I need to care in the first place? I think it's to try and make things simpler, to make them actionable. I'd argue that everything boils down to psychological safety in a way, to the point that if there is psychological safety in your team, then the culture will go well. And if there isn't, your culture will at some point go wrong. So I think it sounds really daunting when we say psychological safety, but it's actually not that complex a concept.
Do you want to explain a little bit? Yeah, like what do you mean by psychological safety?
Yeah, sure. So I think the way I see it is if you kind of picture your best group of humans, whether that's your family, your very close friends, not people you've met yesterday in a bar, but really like the people you really connect with. And the goal for me is to bring the people that you work with to that same level of trust, to the same level of acceptance, vulnerability. That's in that group. Not everyone is perfect. People have their flaws. People have their strengths. So it's, for me, that's the problem I'm trying to solve for, is how do I get to a point where everyone is comfortable showing their strength, showing their weaknesses, and have their voice heard.
I guess I'd like to add and say, you know, psychological safety is like my number one answer as well. The only thing I'd say is we can also do a lot of things to ensure we're able to create situations where the team can be psychologically safe, and have a set of values, right? Like if everybody is aligned, you know, maybe they're going back to the friends sort of example. It's easy to say you're friends because you all share something together. Maybe it's a love for music, or maybe it's love to do something specific. And, you know, we can all, you know, root back to something that we value as a team, as a company. If that is love for our customers, love for the product we're building, or just love for problem solving, it doesn't matter. But we can all unite in some sort of common element as a team. That's what brings us together. But there are still individuals within that team that build the culture together. And so you know, I love to say that, you know, the products we build and the organizations we work for make up the people that are in it, and not the other way around. The organizations exist because of the people. The products that are built are because of the people. So like the people are the cornerstone of an organization's success. And why culture is important is why, so that everybody in that little house that we call an organization are happy and are able to be their best selves at all points, even through their journey as an engineer or whatever they might be doing.
Yeah, I'd second that, KK. I think the why is, I think to answer the why, you almost need to go back in time to what tech used to be, right? Tech a few decades ago was a cost center. It used to report into the CFO or the COO, and at that point, I think people were talking a lot less about culture, because it was a very transactional process, right? Now, what we've just heard from KK is like, that's the team that will build a lot of the products. So therefore, that's where a lot of the innovation comes from in the company. That means you need to accept failure. You need to accept that we won't always get it right. And to do that, you need to have a good culture. So it's a super culture. Is not just like, there's always that meme on LinkedIn and elsewhere about culture is not the ping pong table that you got in your office. And I think it's very rarely people explain why. The reason why culture matters is because it's super connected to what your company can do. If you don't have the right culture, your company will not deliver on its mission.
I think just to add to that, I don't think that an engineering culture can exist in isolation. It's very much dependent on the overall culture of the company. I think definitely the best company cultures have cross-functional working and autonomous teams, where actually the teams work within engineering and also with teams across the whole organization. So no matter what you try to do in engineering, if those values and that way of working doesn't kind of permeate across the whole company, you'll soon have a bunch of very frustrated engineers and they won't want to work outside of their team. So I think as engineering leaders, it's really important to work with other leaders in the organization to find ways of working and culture that everybody can align towards, even though obviously within engineering, there might be some specific kind of ways of working and things that we do. Generally, I think as much as possible, have that shared and have that across the whole company. It just means that things go smoother and kind of the engagement end to end on any kind of piece of work or project is a lot more enjoyable for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, you're talking about psychological safety. You're talking about building a culture across the organization. So, how do you do that? How do you build a culture that is inclusive for everyone and that everyone can feel a part of and feel aligned with?
I'd like to say this is sort of a chicken and egg problem if you look at it in one way. One is like hiring the best talent, and hiring diverse talent requires you to have a psychologically safe team that is inclusive and has diverse talent. And it's like, but how do you get there? And then what is the starting point? I think a lot of teams struggle with that. I think one things that I've seen successfully done is we're able to cultivate and cultivate a culture even with the team you have. Let's start there, right? Like cultivate a place where it's safe that we all bring ourselves. Not everybody is same in any way, and kind of being able to bring that full self to work. If that is, I think, as much as we say the tech world is big, it is actually very small, and people hear about every company's culture, no matter what, and team's culture immediately. It goes around and people talk about it. But so the effort happens in your team within sort of within what you create as the team. So if that is processes that are there, or if that is setting up a space where making mistakes and taking those risks are still validated. And I always go back to, what is the incentive that everybody kind of runs in the team? Do we incentivize or do we not incentivize those that take risks? So in the culture, if the culture does not allow to incentivize those that take risk and fail, this does not allow for long term. I mean, maybe it's fine now, but like long term, within 10 years, you're not looking at an innovative and a cultural team. I've been at Microsoft before, and I've seen that transition. We call it the old Microsoft, right? It's no longer that in my head. The way the culture is, how that transition happened was being able to incentivize risks, being able to think about how we can develop talent, not just at the top level, but all the way around in all levels of career, so that we're able to give people a space to grow from wherever they are. The other thing is, find people who are not traditionally in tech. And there are a lot of people moving into tech from other industries. And I find ways to kind of connect with them and not just bring them to the team, but also create a space for them to be able to be successful, be mentored, being able to grow. This is once the process starts, it's sort of like ball rolling, and now you shouldn't make mistakes. And that's the part, right? Like once you get the ball rolling, it takes effort to start, but then after that, it's a machine that kind of creates that culture within the organization that grows.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about like once you've got that momentum and it can kind of build on itself, and then we have a question from the audience. Somebody's asking, how do you quantify a good culture and whether you can measure that? So if you do start that ball rolling, how do you see that you're on the right path? Are there indicators that you look to in your organizations to track whether your culture is healthy or good or not?
From my perspective, I would say that would depend on the company. I think you need to identify what kind of culture you want to have and what values you're really striving for. So like as KK mentioned, perhaps you want to take a few more risks to hopefully see some of those rewards pay off. And so you might incentivize and try and drive towards that culture. I feel in my company at the moment, we're really trying to build a culture of kind of kindness and openness. So what I would be doing as a leader is trying to reward and recognize people who contribute to that. So whether that's people who take the time to mentor others or to take on events or activities outside of their day job to make other people feel welcome, or to recognize when there's problems with kindness or openness. And as a leader, what I can do then is kind of, as KK said, reward those kind of behaviors and incentivize them. But if actually the company was kind of focused in a different area or a different direction, I think they would have different values that they would be really kind of trying to build their culture around. And I think that really goes back to kind of what the company's mission is. and what they're trying to kind of put out there is that the kind of outward face of the company. So I guess a company that perhaps might have had problems of seeing to be maybe a bit of a dinosaur technically, or a bit risk averse, obviously things like risk would be high priority for them. For a company where your brand is all about kindness and openness, obviously that's definitely something that you want to replicate within your engineering department and company as a whole. So personally, I don't think there is one definition of a good culture. I think it 100% varies, and people, engineers, will find homes in different companies depending on what their personal values are.
I mean, an obvious one, although it is not, it's sort of quantifying. This is a hard one from an HR standpoint. You quantify is good attrition and a bad attrition, right? Like and regrettable attrition. So we want to identify regrettable attrition, and that can be a measure of potentially quantifying where our direction is, because people are here that we believe are valuing our culture and big proponent to the team and great contributors to the company. That would be a good attrition. Sometimes can be a reason and a pointer to see where culture is at.
I agree with that. I think there's also a lot that can be done to demystify culture. We quite used in our orgs to drive projects, right? And we've got frameworks that work to drive projects. You wouldn't embark on some important piece of work without a plan, without wondering what are the metrics that I want to shift, what is the impact I want to have. It's kind of the same thing for culture. Like if you're hoping to have a good engineering culture, and I bet other type of cultures, without putting some efforts in it, without putting some thoughts aligning between your leadership, that's unlikely that it will get really far, right? So if you start being intentional about how do we want to drive culture, what do we mean by driving good culture, what are the indicators that show us that we're on the right track, then you've already done a massive piece of work, and you start answering that question from the audience about what does good culture look like. Just treat it as any other project. Put some OKRs in place. Put some metrics, and then put some action plan to drive towards that metric, and then you'll see the culture shifting.
So we have a follow-up question from the audience. So, we talked about how, you've decided the kind of culture that you want to have, and then you talk about you're going to incentivize that. So how would you actually specifically incentivize that? Like, what are the things that you would offer to make a kinder culture or a more risk-taking culture? Like, what kinds of incentives would you offer?
For me, I think I would build it into people's day job. So obviously, there's certain behaviors or achievements people have to get to in order to kind of progress in their career or to, progress financially. So I think it shouldn't be treated differently to any of the technical hard skills that we look for. It can be considered like a soft skill or, cultural fit skill. I just think reward it as we reward everything else appropriately, and kind of give people reward and responsibility that matches that. So if someone's particularly good in a particular area that you're looking to grow, obviously give them more responsibility in that area, which I think in itself is an incentive. If people are enjoying demonstrating in certain areas, we can then perhaps get them to lead maybe a chapter on that, or, introduce other people, to that as part of onboarding and things like that. So I think there's kind of career and financial ways, but also softer ways that people can also help to build on those skills that they're demonstrating there.
I think a good way, so sure, incentives can go to helping you uphold your cultural pillars. I think that's one way. There's also a way which is maybe even more efficient, which I don't think a lot of companies do, which is just training. That's you were talking, Ruth, before about the same as hard skills. You wouldn't think of growing your engineers without training them on those hard skills. You can do the same on culture. You can, once you've identified what are the key pillars of your culture, you can actually, it's okay to to train people and go, okay, we're going to take you on a journey to uphold those pillars. I think one of the risks of culture is to go, oh, no, we don't want to kind of indoctrinate people into the culture. Like, your employees are grown up. They're going to take that training with exactly the same way they approach all the other training. They're going to approach it with their own personal lens. They're going to see what they like into that, what applies to their job. But you can't just expect the culture to just appear without doing exactly what you do on all the other themes.
I just want to call out, that's such a great point. Like, we can't just expect, of course, we're like looking for culture fit when we're, hiring, but we can't expect people to come understanding every aspect of the values our companies have, and even stating and kind of training them through that is one way. But also, if you're changing culture, that is such an important piece. I think I've been through sort of cultural transitions, being at GitHub, sort of cultural transitions, and seeing that, and the big thing we did was actually culture cafes, where we invited everybody in the company to attend one of them. We either had panels, we had workshops, talks, and that was a great way to kind of indoctrinate people into the new culture, or get people attached to what they believe. So I can't stress how important what James saying is.
I think the other benefit of doing that is also that it keeps your culture alive. It creates that kind of moment where, okay, now we're going to talk about that, whether that's kindness in the case of Bumble or any other value. That is the space where we're going to tell you what we think is the answer. And then let's have a debate about it. Let's discuss that. But let's not make it something that you've got to adhere to without training you or talking about it.
So one thing that's come up a lot recently, and that's obviously very relevant with COVID, is how do you do this in a remote distributed environment? So a lot of companies are, for the first time, having to really confront remote or hybrid working situations. So how do you build culture in a distributed environment where you don't have people in the office? You can't necessarily have a culture cafe in person. So how have you been facing those challenges?
Yeah, we never had it in person. GitHub has always been a remote company for the last 10 years. I think so. The COVID has kind of made it much more real for many people. But as a company, we've practiced it ever since its genesis. And two things that we say is make remote first a value of the company. Remote first versus remote friendly is a whole lot of difference. Remote first is where everybody's expected, even if they're in the same workspace, to be remote because you're acknowledging people not in the space. The other thing is, from an engineering directly standpoint, one of the things we talk about is have everything written, have everything documented that allows for the culture to kind of spread. Like, everything should be accessible and documented, and nothing should be private. And that's part of our culture. As much as I say, write everything down, push everything to some sort of way when it's visible for everybody in the company, is the easiest way to kind of practice. And the other thing that we follow as a culture that makes remote easy is, and I know there's a lot of thoughts around this, is we keep our videos on no matter what. And if we are not, we kind of say, hey, this is why we're not keeping our videos on. We are present in the meeting just like we are present at work. And so there's like sort of three things I can think about that we do to kind of foster culture and bring that within and make it easier to kind of go through remote. Actually, just thought of one more other thing. We actually donut people preparing sessions where they, like, either within a team, within an org, or across the company, being able to meet cross-functional people across the company, sort of water cooler talks that we're able to do. So some few ways that we can kind of enable that in-person environment in remote.
Yeah, I'd say, I think from my side, like, what we've been trying to do is look at what our culture was like pre-remote working, and then not try to expect that it's going to be exactly the same, because some of the things that we did and the things that we built our culture around worked really well in person, but they just don't translate to remote. So it's actually about trying to rethink what does work for remote. And obviously, during the last kind of 18 months, there's been a lot of different ideas tried and different things. Some have been more successful than others. And I think now we're actually rethinking again, because we're actually in a bit of a hybrid mode now, where some people would like to go back to the office. There isn't at the moment any mandate to go back to the office, but people can, and a lot of people are choosing to because they want that social contact. So I can give like one example of something that we're trying at Bumble, which is that a lot of people had said that they were found that once they were working from home, they felt like they were always on. And this wasn't a culture that we had previously. People felt like when they worked hard, but once they left the office, they were gone. So we've tried different things, but one thing that we found a lot of success with was having this whole company week off. I think some other companies have tried this as well. And I think it's become more popular since this kind of more emphasis on remote working, but just to try and give people real switch off time, so that when they are actually, having some time where they're not missing meetings or not feeling like, oh, I'll just check Slack while I'm actually, taking annual leave, but really to just give people some downtime. So we tried that for a week and found it successful, and that's something that we're going to continue. If we'd have still been all in person, it was a lot harder for people to join in remotely. So when they were out of the office on holiday, they were out and they were missing things. So I think, that's just one example, but I do think we have to be creative and come up with different things that work for remote and for hybrid, and not just try to kind of repurpose the in-person cultural kind of tweaks and hinges that we had.
Yeah, that makes sense. Codility also is doing a whole company week off.
Was that something that you started post switching to remote working, or is that something you've always done?
So I haven't been here that long, so I know that they did it last year, and they're doing it. We're doing it again this year, but I don't know whether it was spurred specifically as a result of COVID. So I guess we have another question from the audience here. Do you think a technical engineering manager will help to build a strong engineering team? Or for people who are pure people managers, what can they do to build a good engineering team culture? I don't know.
I'll take it. I don't know. I don't know if there's like a global answer when I think about it. It really depends on the company's culture and kind of what you're trying to do as a company. And I have been in healthy debates with my senior leadership about the context of technical engineering managers and pure people managers. And I find that it's really part of what you want as a company. I think it is valuable to have an engineering manager understand technically the team's work and be able to give mentorship or guidance or kind of be there as another person in the room. I'm still focusing on the people side of the of management, but that's my personal opinion, and I'm happy to disagree with anybody and kind of have that sort of philosophical discussion. But I don't think there's one way or the other. I think a great engineering culture, like we talked about earlier, is dependent on the company, and if the company requires first line managers to have strong technical and be technical managers first before they're people managers, then that's part of the culture, and that's what we're building as a company.
Yeah, I'd agree with what KK says. I think it's also I'm not sure that's what the question implies, but the manager play a role, right? They people manager, they project managers, they're responsible for an area of work, which suggests that they manage interactions and therefore culture. But I think everyone plays a role in that culture. So I'm not sure if the question implies that it's the responsibility of the managers to own that culture or not. But if that's what it implies, I disagree. I think it's everyone within the company that is responsible for that culture. And when we were talking before about training, that's one training we've got within Meta, is that you are all responsible for the culture. And if in a meeting you see someone else behaving in a way that is not true to the culture, that is the responsibility of everyone to call out that is not the way we expect the culture to work. It's not just the responsibility of the person who feels under attack.
Mm-hmm. Is there a danger if something is everybody's responsibility that it becomes nobody's responsibility? Is there one person or one set of people in the organization? Like who's setting the terms of that culture? Does it come from leadership, or is it grow organically out of the company?
I would say it's probably a bit of both. I think as part of leadership, it is 100% part of your job and responsibility to nurture a good culture and to create the conditions where a good culture will thrive, or on the converse, stamp out conditions where a bad culture will thrive. So, for example, like if you have values or culture that you want to see, you have to embody that, and you have to live those values. And as we discussed before, you have to call out and reward people who are behaving that way. But ultimately, you also need the other people in your team to be part of that and to really buy into the values and the culture that you're trying to build, because everybody needs to be contributing to that. I'd say the only other kind of main thing apart from that is around looking at that as part of your hiring process. So really being deliberate about who you're hiring and looking for those things as part of your hiring process, so that, you know, anyone that you bring in is going to add positive things to the culture and kind of be on board with that before they join the company, so they know kind of why they're being hired and what kind of standards and culture we expect. And if there's any training gaps, obviously, as discussed, we can address those. But I think, you know, generally it's a big part of like who you hire and bring in, especially with fast growing teams, because I think it can be quite difficult to keep the culture in hand if the team grows fast, and you have to be really conscious of it and keep it as like a main priority, I think.
I'll also say that, you know, for a lot of things, it's nice to have ownership of one single person, but culture is a little bit different than that. Culture is the people. It's what we value as a company, and if it's only in the ownership of 5 people or 10 people or percentage of the company, that puts a lot of effort, and it needs to be a little bit more everywhere within the company. I think, as Rose said, I agree that like the culture is defined by a mix of leadership as well as the team, and the people in the company. But everybody should own it. Everybody should live it. And I also sort of say, if you're not valuing the company's culture, rethink whether this is the right company or is this the right place, or do you want to go and, you know, be a part in the change of the culture within the organization? If there's, you know, part of engineering culture that we don't agree with how deployments are made, then be the voice to make those changes, if you don't completely agree.
I'd go back to the analogy we were talking about right at the beginning of your circle of friends, right? You probably wouldn't, in your circle of friends, make someone responsible for how we behave as a group of friends, right? And it's kind of the same thing. You probably don't want to elect someone to own that responsibility, but at the same time, there will be maybe a point where there is a crisis in that group, and you go, okay, we need to solve that, and let's discuss about that. Let's agree as a group, and because it's a company, maybe you do that in a more formal way, more as a project, and then there becomes an honor. But yeah, you wouldn't have. I don't think you would have one person who is responsible for, no, this is not how we behave in this circle of friends. That would be odd.
That's an interesting point you bring up there, you know, when there's a crisis or something, an issue that needs to be addressed. And so one of my questions was, you know, when have you seen things go wrong? When have you seen a bad engineering culture, and how do you fix it? How do you improve a broken engineering culture? So I won't ask anyone to name names. You can use hypothetical examples, but you know, how do you identify that broken culture, and how do you fix it? How do you change it?
That will be a really long event if we talk about everything that can go wrong in the culture. I think it goes back to the KPIs you've set for your culture, right? KK was talking before about churn. That's a fairly widespread one, right? So I think it's monitor these indicators, and if you think they're still the relevant indicators and they're starting to go red, then you've got something that you want to fix. I think in terms of things that can go wrong, it can go wrong at any size. Like even in many ways, I've seen small companies go wrong from an engineering culture much more than big organizations. Sometimes you've got in a small team, you'll have one dominant person that kind of sets the whole culture, and that doesn't work beyond a very, very small team. So I think it's not a matter of the scale or the size of the company. I think there's anything that can go wrong.
I'd like to add, I believe in the idea of we're all constantly evolving as companies, as people. And if I stop hearing for potential ways to improve our team, our engineering process, our hiring process, or if I stop hearing someone crib about it, I kind of question and be like, wait, why are we not hearing why are we not hearing about things that aren't going well? Is everything actually perfect the way it should be? Usually that's a good indicator of lack of psychological safety. The thing about psychological safety, it's hard to kind of measure, because when do you know people aren't safe enough to speak? Because they're not going to be safe enough to say they're not safe enough to speak. And so a good indicator that I kind of always got check is, have I gotten enough people this month who come and said, hey, I'd love to see this thing come and change, or I want to change this particular piece of it. Oh, I wish we did something like this more of, right? And so I'm constantly looking for feedback from the team, from the people, from leadership, everywhere around. It should be sort of an equal balance coming from all over the place. And that's sort of an indicator that I feel like at least we're in a learning culture, because I value learning and the growing and changing a lot. And so that's my indication on a gut to see whether we're trending towards not such a great direction.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, that a lack of feedback is actually a form of feedback in itself, that maybe people aren't feeling safe to give you the honest feedback. So maybe on that topic, on the topic of learning and growing, we have a question from the audience about how often do you stop and reflect and see whether the values that you've set and the culture that you have put forward, is that still appropriate? Does it still match the fit of the team? If the company's growing and changing, if new people are joining the company, how often do you reevaluate or change that culture?
I think that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. The reason you're investing in your culture is to service the mission of your organization, right? So, and that mission might change. The pace of the organization might change. You don't want the same culture in a company that is finding itself and finding the product market fit to a company that is just about to go for IPO, or a company that is under crisis. You don't need the same culture. So that's based on what is the need of the organization, and are we currently feeling like we're doing all the right thing that the organization need. And if we don't, then maybe the culture is an issue. And then we need to go back and go, actually, all these things, all the importance on psychological safety, and we want feedback because we want really quick loop. We want to be able to iterate the product really fast. Maybe when you suddenly have a reputational crisis to manage, maybe you don't want that much feedback at that point. Maybe you just want people to get in line, do what they're told. And that's a different that's a different stage of the culture in your business, and that's fine. And that's the stage where you go back to your culture and go, okay, we've had a massive event from a company side. Do we want to review how our culture works? Are the pillars still valid?
Yeah, I think cultures evolve with the companies, as you're saying, JM, and as the size or the mission of the company changes, it's natural. So probably written down somewhere or discussed is some main pillars or main cultural aims that you have. And you'll probably look back on them and think, yeah, they're still broadly aligned. And then over time, you'll find that you're starting to shift towards maybe something a little different. And so I wouldn't say there's a set time period of evaluate every 6 months or every year, but I just think it's one of those things to always be keeping an eye on and evolving as the organization evolves. And it probably depends how much your organization is changing, how often you would kind of need to revisit those. But I definitely think, like, as you start small, you can be, you know, a lot more nimble. Everybody knows everybody. Things can be kind of implicit rather than written down. And as you get bigger, you need to be more conscious and deliberate about instilling cultural values into people. So there's always going to be, you know, most companies are growing, and as they grow, you know, I think that's always a point to check. You know, do we need to change anything about how we're approaching this? Do we need to add any additional values, or actually are some of those ones that we used to really value less important, you know, based on where we are at the moment? So probably just like a continual evolution rather than kind of fixed changing.
That makes sense. So I'm conscious of time here, and I'm sure everybody has very busy schedules. So maybe I'd ask everyone on the panel to just share one key takeaway, or what do you think the most important thing that the audience should take away about culture? Maybe JM, you could start, and we'll go the other way around this time.
Sure. One key takeaway. So I think the key thing, which I think we've discussed today, is how important culture is. And I think the main thing I'd probably do is both take a lot of pride, because when you're in charge of building that culture, whether that's as a manager, as a leader, as an individual contributor, doesn't really matter. That has a massive impact on everyone within the business. So take pride in doing that. At the same time, it's like any technology product, it's something that evolves. So don't hesitate to play with it. Don't hesitate to try different things. See what works. I think it's this kind of, it's at the same time something really serious that really matters and has a massive impact on the quality of the experience that people have in the company. At the same time, it's something that needs to be playful, that keeps being fluid.
Two things I personally took away is culture is evolving. I saw that sort of thread in all of our answers at some point. And it's okay that culture is evolving. It is important for us to recognize and train and create the culture that we want in an organization, as a group, as a company, as leaders. The other takeaway for me is, train people for the culture we need, because that's going to be a way as much we expect for people to be trained in their hard skills. This is as important and equally important to having a successful engineering team and engineering product and a company. And so train people.
Yeah, I think I'd echo what KK said. For me, that conversation around valuing cultural skills as much as hard skills, and actually training people, not just expecting people to pick them up organically. I think it was a really nice conversation. And I think personally, like, I'm going to take something away from that today and see how I can build that into my thinking for team culture in the future. So thank you very much, guys.
Great. Yeah, thanks again. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm sure if we were in person, there would be applause a little bit, but we'll just imagine that as it's virtual. But thank you so much. We could give ourselves a round of applause, I suppose. But yeah, thank you all very much. I think this is, I've learned a lot from you, and I'm sure the audience has as well. And this has just been a really interesting discussion, and there's a lot to kind of dig into here, and obviously limit to how long we can go in this short of a time period, but I think some great answers and some really great discussion. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to the audience too for coming, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll take some of these things back to your own companies and to help yourselves have a better culture where you work. So thank you very much.